First, we need to put the causal body in perspective. All right, so one of the tools we talked about yesterday was looking at the ocean of consciousness from the perspective of more dense, more concrete, to more subtle, more abstract. And ultimately, concrete would be the physical level of the body, which is consciousness made manifest. And then finer, 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 and as we go to finer levels of the physiology, that which we know to be ourself expands, becomes more abstract, spreads out, until we come down to the finest manifest level of what we are, which I'm using the word causal to describe that. That's the causal level. That's what I'm using. And then beneath that is being. Beneath that is unmanifest, infinite, quality-less being, source of creation. So source of creation is the resource, all the energy and all the intelligence and all the creativity and all the power to create this whole universe comes from there. And then the causal level of creation is where that resource starts to become implemented. And so that's why it's a webinar like this is really useful, because we go looking into that well begun is half done, that first level of how do we implement this incredibly rich resource of energy and intelligence and creativity and power that's available from the source of creation. So we need to look at that, because if we can understand that level of the manifesting process, then that level is fundamental to all the more dense expressions of self. So if we get the first step right, then all the other steps should follow in nice order. All right. So here we are in our physical form, in our life, and we're taking a dive inward, and we're looking at the finest level of feeling, of being, of manifest being. And the review from yesterday is we can see it in 3 different ways. We can see it as realms or spaces. We can see it as vibrations or frequencies, or we can see it as humming spaces. So you can see it as just spaces, just hums, or hums and spaces together. It's important because having the freedom to look at or approach the causal level from these 3 different perspectives provides us with some flexibility for dealing with different types of problems. It's important to have a little bit of today's discussion about suffering, because when illness is there, that is one of the features of our world. That is something. It's why we have energy healing. We wouldn't need energy healing if there was no suffering. So we need to kind of get some understanding of that and get that in perspective. And then we need to look into a little more detail about those humming realms in the causal field and the relationship with karma, because suffering and karma tend to also go together. All right. So now I'd like to just take a minute, and look into the field of our collective, our beautiful collective this morning, and just kind of check in and see how everybody's doing. And again, just as it was a few minutes ago before we started this webinar, I'm feeling the very nice, unfettered connection to the source of creation. And I feel as if there's a huge amount of resource that's like backing us up this morning. There's a lot of energy. It's like a lively, rich access. So that's a blessing, but it's also a responsibility, because when we have access to that much source energy, then that means that we're required to use it in an honorable way, to use it in a way which is good for everyone, which is uplifting in the highest and best possible way. So the first flow that's coming through is a flow of gratitude for access. And we're looking at that very delicate spot between the source of creation, where the resource is, and the causal level of the physiology, and gratitude for the fact that it's wide open. Secondly, appreciating the fact that that resource is like a kind of a light that's flowing into and illuminating the causal level of our physiology. And I say the causal level of our physiology like it's one thing, because at the dense level, we're all separate. I'm over here and you're over there. But at that causal level, the abstract physiology spreads out and we overlap quite a lot. We're quite overlapped. There's another point that came out yesterday, which I think is important and is being illuminated for me now. And that is that we also made a little inquiry into the way other beings, not human beings, and stars in particular, view the causal realm. Because that's another angle. They have completely different physiologies than us. Stars have completely different physiologies. And they see the causal realm as a great ocean of light, at least to the best of my ability to describe what I perceive they are seeing, the stars are seeing. I spent quite a bit of time inquiring this last week based on a side project that I have. So the causal realm, as it lights up with the radiance of pure being, it looks to me more the way it looks from the perspective of a star, just a ginormous ocean, infinite ocean of light, field of light. So the star doesn't see it with all of its little separations. And that light flowing and our ability to appreciate that the causal level of creation is also that, it creates bliss in the causal field. So that's another quality that's sort of growing or awakening in the causal field. And as we talked about yesterday, as different qualities sort of awaken in the causal field, then they form foundations or building blocks for the manifestation at the denser level, the physiology. So the open relationship between barely manifest and unmanifest allows this flow of light to come into the causal realm. And that flow of light is revealing the delicate internal structure of the causal body, and at the same time is creating happiness because our collective is recognizing it. The act of recognition naturally elicits an effect of bliss. So this is a principle in energy healing. This is a principle that if there's suffering in some part of the physiology, if we just bring our attention to that part of the physiology, the very act of bringing the attention elicits a response of upliftment of feeling. It brings happiness with it. The other thing is that the happiness that's coming through is radiating from the causal level like that, and it's radiating up into the denser tissues and denser levels of the physiology. But what I'm seeing as it comes up is it's coming up in a very integrated manner. So it doesn't overwhelm. It's very important that we talked about this yesterday, that if a person is sort of gripped into the darker levels of creation or gripped into the brighter, lighter levels of creation, either form of gripping isn't balanced. So when that power or energy of being starts to rise up into the denser levels of the physiology, has to come up in a balanced manner in order to do maximum good for the physiology without setting everything off its kilter. Maintaining alignment with cosmic evolution. So I'm just feeling that as it's rising up into the denser levels of the physiology. Now I see why it's doing that. So as it's rising up into the denser levels of the physiology, it gets to areas like the etheric body, physical body, and even mental and emotional bodies. And at those levels, that's where we interface with the relative level of creation. And at the relative level of creation, that's where we come in contact with suffering. So their memories and impressions of suffering. And I'm seeing primarily in the heart area, this is where the suffering gets a little bit locked into the system. So right there, we're going to just awareness in the heart area. And what the suffering that I'm seeing is from centuries and centuries and centuries of experience, memory, human memory. So as that happiness comes in, it creates an interference pattern with the memories and impressions and the feelings that got locked into the heart of loss and grief, all in the transformation that occurs in creation. Almost always when there's a transformation, it can give rise to a feeling of loss. So just clearing that, attachments in the heart that may have caused that feeling of change to be uncomfortable. And some flexibility moving in there. And the flexibility is, of course, the quality of the causal field. It's like a resonation of the causal field that rises up and goes to the heart area and supports the ability to make transitions very smoothly. Just you see the shift, you see the direction, the trajectory, and you just move with it. This is supporting all of our abilities, actually bringing a kind of quality of flexibility into our collective so that as a collective, we can move in a coordinated and integrated, balanced manner very efficiently, where it's like oiling up the machinery of our collective, that we can start to move in a sort of powerful, unified pattern in order to do the larger healings that we as a collective need to do in order to support beautiful progress, well-being, all good for everyone. It's interesting. As that's happening, I'm also seeing a kind of a stability coming into the group in the form of beautiful, orderly interface of threads of consciousness, which are connecting our group in order to promote the most efficient possible outcome of each step that we take collectively. Beautiful, you're beautiful. You're so beautiful. Thank you. All right. So when I was taking a deeper look into the causal realm, one of the things I noticed was that from the human perspective, it's like looking at a house with rooms. And we come in with a sort of package. Oh, first I should say, I looked into what the Vedas had to say about karma and package, right? We come into the world with our package of karma. And so there's Sanchita karma, which is like the great mountain of karma that's created by every act that you've ever performed in the past. And there's Prarabdha karma, which is the present life karma. And then in a book in the other room, there's the other karma, whose name is written in that book, which I don't remember. And that's the future karma, future karma coming in. And all of our brilliant Vedic scientists out there, you may have the name for that third kind of karma. As I admit, not being an expert in Vedic science, but also a great appreciator of Vedic science. Anyway, so we can think of those three karmas as past, present, and future. And that's good and that's useful. But at the causal level of the physiology, we're seeing more detail. So I have to make up my own words at this point. So what's happening there is I'm seeing the spaces which resonate. And so I started going in and looking at them in detail. And what I found was that every space has a kind of a sacred center, and every edge is comprised of karma. And I think there was a webinar a long time ago, maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, where I talked about the shards of the broken mirror, which is actually a phrase that I borrowed from somebody else, but it's apt when talking about the way awareness traverses the field of creation. It breaks apart. And so it was karma. I found karma on the edges of those packages of awareness, packages of consciousness, karma. So I realized that karma it has this sort of binding or constricting, it creates tension, and it defines the edges of the spaces. Now, the nature or the shape and size of the spaces determines the type of resonation which they produce. So some spaces are like very isolated. You know, it's just like you can sort of portion off exactly where they reside in the causal realm, like a little bubble in the causal realm has been created. But some structures are more systemic. They run through the causal realm, and we touched on that just briefly yesterday in a very interesting part of yesterday's webinar, where I talked about the relationship between the way we see the causal realm and the way people who are not in the body anymore, who've died, are looking at that, and did a healing for compassion. That was an interesting moment. So anyway, just reflecting back on that briefly, that sometimes the resonations, they all have a center. Every space has a center. And what happens is from that center, the resonation is produced. And sometimes if the walls or edges of the space aren't like really dense, they're kind of like more pliable, more gentle, more soft, then the radiance of that comes from that center of that causal space can go out and meet with the field of creation. And the resonation goes into all the areas. Actually, even if the space is a very dense space, its resonation will still be echoed or reflected in all areas of the field. But there are times when the heart of the space, this is all, by the way, this is all new information coming in right now. Like I'm learning as you're learning. So just throwing that out there. Anyway, the heart of each causal space has a significance. And the closer the nature of that heart is to the field of pure being, the better connected it is. And it's sometimes I see them as like cords, just like the cord of light runs through our bodies. Cord of light runs through all these causal realms or causal spaces. The more connected it is, the more systemic the effects of the vibration from that particular space are. I think it's useful at this point to bring in a little thread of something that came up in the last couple of weeks, which was, I became aware when I was in the middle of a healing with a family member that there was, I found one of the hearts. I found a heart in one of the spaces which had been formed by my karma when it came into this lifetime. And it's so close, the heart of that one is so close to the absolute, that it had been going virtually unrecognized by me, mostly taken for granted, I would say. But when it came up clear as a bell, and I looked at that, I was like, oh yeah, that feeling. I remember it so well from before I was born. And I remember really experiencing it a lot as a toddler, very small. And the last time really experiencing it really clearly and distinctly, I was about 2.5 or 3, right about in there. And I looked at that thing and I looked at what was going on in my healing with my son. And I said to myself, that is the foundation for this experience I'm having right now. There's the foundation for it. It's like we were on the surface having our surface experience, and then I was also seeing the seed of the surface experience, and I recognized, oh, that's something that came into this life with me. So we can look at certain types of karmas, like sustaining walls in a house. There's certain karmas that aren't going to move, that you don't want to move, you know, that are self-chosen for this lifetime, very important for each of the events of the life to follow in an evolutionary manner. But there are other walls that are non-weight-bearing walls, non-sustaining walls. And those walls have the ability to move. And when a wall crops up in the causal realm that gives rise to illness or suffering in some way, it's all rarely going to be a sustaining wall. It's almost always going to be a wall that you can move. So we need to talk about moving walls. We need to talk about construction. We can think of the causal realm as a realm where the laws of nature, of construction of consciousness or structure begin, because you've got the unmanifest quality-less level of creation that has no structure. And then at the causal level, we start structure. So all the laws of nature that are responsible for structuring everything, both manifest things as physical as flowers and people, or as abstract as thoughts and ideas and beliefs, etc. The foundations for structuring come from there, from the causal level. Okay. Moving walls, moving walls. So there are short-term and long-term effects, short-term and long-term. And what's generally the general pattern, and this could be unique to Kali Yuga, which I actually believe it is that if we choose, the short-term effect is based on the immediate decisions in the moment, right? So there are two different types of choices that come up. There's a really easy choice and a really hard and a harder choice. When there's a problem, right? The problem is in front of you. You have choices, okay? One choice is, I could just run away. That's an easy choice. Or the other choice is, I could go into this thing which is fearsome and yucky and messy and get dirty and see what's going on in there. And so that's the harder choice. Or I can put up walls. That's another kind of running away, right? There's an old archetypal story that the thicker the walls the person builds around them, the smaller the being is inside. And I don't know how universal that is, but anyway, that's more in the field of psychology. But the runaway is easy, and the go in and face it is hard. But what's really interesting about that is when we look at the long-term effect, it is opposite. If we do the easy process in the moment, the runaway, or I'm just not going to look at that, or I'm going to be in denial, then the long-term effect is not as nice. It means that whatever that problem is doesn't get dealt with, obviously. But if we do the more difficult choice in the moment of dealing with it, then the long-term effect is that thing got dealt with. A new wall got built, and now the structure is more aligned with divine intention, with cosmic evolution. So, and it forms a foundation. Then that action forms a foundation for better experience in the future. So one of the complications that we're dealing with when it comes to dealing with challenges is that because we're living in Kali Yuga, the laws of nature tend to sort of favor. There's a favoring of suffering. I hate to say it. Even the words kind of bug me a little bit to say it, but one doesn't have to look any further than the news to know that at this time in creation, it's not that hard to find the suffering. It's there. I mean, look at South Sudan, look at Syria, look at Venezuela. You know, there are all kinds of, look at what the people in Hawaii are going through right now. So there are a lot of things that are bubbling up. Guatemala. Yeah. So one doesn't have to look far to see that the changes are there which are causing evolution. The migrant situation, yes, somebody's just mentioning here on the chat, the migrant situation, which I referred to Syria because that's kind of the seed of that. Yeah, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So what that means is that instead of the way it would be in Sat Yuga, where you just barely have an intention of anything and it manifests, because the laws of nature are supporting all the positive and the good to just come up to the surface quickly, one goes into that and one has to kind of work with those laws of nature that are allowing the negativity to be. They're allowing it to be. That means they're allowing the karma to show on the surface. And so we're really, when we're dealing with restructuring our home, we're using our home as a metaphor here, when we're dealing with restructuring and building walls in new places so we have a more open floor plan or whatever it is that suits. We're really talking about working directly with karma. So, tools for working with karma for everybody, healing for everybody. Structures in the causal field itself that are specifically designed to work with karma. We can look at them from 3 different angles, right? We can look at them as a realm, as a vibration, or as being. So we can say there's a realm, there's a space in the causal field, which is all the laws of nature, which are responsible for the creation and dissolution of karmas and the modifications of karmas. That there's a space where those laws of nature are gathered and lively. And this is part of your causal body. This is, you have continuous access. It belongs to you. This is you. This is part of you. It's kind of like being in medical school and going through and learning all the parts. And this bone is called the ulna or whatever, we learn the different names of the different parts. And being able to define verbally something that we're looking at really helps to lock it in place as something that one has access to. When we're looking at it first as a sort of abstract thing, it's like, there's a realm where the laws of nature are for dealing with karma. That's a little abstract. Okay, so let's look at it from the angle of vibration. The vibration, the frequency of energy, of consciousness in that space is exceedingly powerful. It's exceedingly powerful and noble because the capacity or ability to transform karma is fundamental to literally everything that manifests. So it's huge. It's a huge responsibility. It's a huge capability. It's a huge thing. But you can do it. You wouldn't be on this webinar if it wasn't your birthright and it wasn't for you to do this. We have to do. It's not just that. This is why we did that healing for the base of the head to the neck yesterday. I don't know if you recall that, but this is the chief and this is the Indians, right? So we had to open that up a little bit. Individuality and universality, we had to open it up and get that smooth out that connection in the physiology. And everybody who's new and wasn't in on yesterday's session, you get all the healings from yesterday too, even if you weren't there, it doesn't matter. Because we're at a time in history and our world, just wait. I have more information to bring you in future webinars, but it's a very big deal. But the world and humanity are at a time now where we're on the brink of facing challenges which are going to require a much larger capacity to promote evolutionary change, a much greater ability to work with the laws of nature and to heal ourselves and our world and others. We're on the brink of it. We're on the brink of it. So we need this, even though it's very powerful, and we think, well, maybe in my life I don't need that much responsibility. It's okay. You're going to be happy to have it because you're going to need it. So welcome to the healing circle. Anyway. All right. So it's a space of being where all the laws of nature reside. There is an energy signature or frequency there. And that energy frequency sits at what I would call the forward end of the axis. Yesterday I talked about the 4 axes for navigating the ocean of consciousness. There's an axis that ranges from less aware to more aware. Okay, so the energy frequency in this particular space of the causal realm is like way at the forward end of the aware. There's a lot of awareness that goes along with that particular space. With awareness goes into that space of self. Access to great wisdom, access to great knowledge. access to understanding of how the mechanics of consciousness reveal this reality and reveal divinity, express divinity as the reality. If we look at it in terms of beings, we can think of the Karmic Board. Sometimes I've referred to the Karmic Board, and that would be a collection or a group of forms of creation which also sit on the forward end of that axis from less aware to more aware. So not so much the workmen, you know, the little devas who make the skin glow and that sort of thing, but more at the larger end of creation. The great universal saints, their names, people before me have identified those forms like Mother Mary, El Moria, Master Lady Nada. I think Maitreya is on the board. There's many. I don't know how many. You can look it up. You can Google it. For me, I found in energy healing, it's not necessary to go in and to have every single name at the tip of my tongue like that. The important thing is to recognize that it's part of myself. It's like, if you want to pick something up, better talk to the right hand, because that's how we pick stuff up, right? So it's like that. It's like if you want to move karma, you go to that part of the being. So when we want to pick something up, we don't think, oh, let's see, I have to move this muscle like this, and then I have to open my... No, you just reach out and grab whatever. You grab the thing and you pick it up. So that's what we're doing. We need to be efficient. We can get caught in it. Sometimes it's easy to get caught, you know, in the names and the personalities and the visual images and all that of the forms. And that's okay. It's okay to explore on that level because it's uplifting, and it could be your dharma to do that. If you're an artist, you might want to, you know, make paintings of the Karmic Board or something like that. But you know, and so that's valid because it helps people. It's another way of defining it. But the important thing is to own it. That's the important thing. We must know that there's no gap. There's no separation between who and what we are, and that level of our own consciousness, that level of our intelligence.